Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be back this afternoon. I'm absolutely delighted to announce our Satellite Symposium session for the afternoon. This is where we go into things maybe a little bit more nitty-gritty, get some more stories, etc. We've got 4 sessions, and then we finish, hopefully, by 3 o'clock, I believe. The first session is Point of Care Health from Earth to Space, and I'm beyond delighted to pull on stage former NASA astronaut Scott Parazynski and Paul Fotheringham, founder and CTO of 3D Lightprint. So please put your hands together for Scott and Paul.
Hello, everyone. I am the opening act. My name is Scott Parazynski. I like being the opening act because the bar is set so low, but the pressure is very high for my colleague here, Paul, who will come next. So there's a lot of anticipation for the main event. Just no pressure. No, it's really delightful to be here with you. But what I wanted to do is tell you a few stories of why I feel that exploration is such an important catalyst for innovation, and innovation goes in both directions. I'm a product of the Apollo program. When I grew up, my father worked on the Saturn V rockets that first took astronauts to the moon in the late 60s, early 70s. Now we're part of the Artemis generation. We're sending rockets now back to the moon. In fact, there's a capsule that's orbiting the moon as we speak, and it will be a forerunner for sending astronauts back to the moon and ultimately on to Mars. So it's a very exciting time. This is a much younger version of myself with stars in my eyes and with ambitions to one day go visit Mars. It didn't quite work out that way for my professional career, but I know it's about to happen, and it's going to take a lot of innovation, a lot of brilliant minds to make it happen. My personal career as an explorer has taken me to some pretty cool places, however, some pretty epic spacewalks, several trips aboard the space shuttle to the International Space Station, the Russian Space Station Mir, but even deep beneath our oceans to Antarctica, even within volcanic crater, Masaya Volcano, standing about 30 feet away from a lava lake that was roiling with energy. And the reason I've participated in all these types of expeditions is because they actually press our knowledge, but also press our technologies. How do we safely send explorers into these extreme environments, keep them safe, extract meaningful science and engineering, and then as we make these investments invariably have incredible rewards back here in Houston and around the globe for the rest of us. So that's the story that I wanted to share with you here. And for some reason, we're not advancing. There we go. But it really is an extraordinary time to be alive. You certainly have heard of all the wonderful successes that Elon Musk and SpaceX have had. You heard a talk this morning from Axiom Space that will be launching its own independent space station in the not-too-distant future. There are other companies that will be doing similar things. Sir Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic and Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin. It's sort of a billionaire space race, or at least a space investment. But there's investment coming from all facets of our economy, and the rewards will be really extraordinary. So what I wanted to share with you is, what do we need to invent to get us back to the moon and eventually on to Mars? Because I think these are perhaps mission statements for some of the entrepreneurs here in the room. If you can figure out how to solve some of these problems, there will be significant rewards for you here back at sea level on Earth. So I'm going to talk about some of these needs of future exploration that might prove quite valuable to entrepreneurs. And I break it up into just a few categories here: human health, psychological factors, the distance involved, resupply versus what we call ISRU, or in situ resource utilization. How do we live off the land, basically? And then the crew composition. So these are just areas for future innovation and thought. This is a good friend of mine, Sonny Williams, running the Boston Marathon aboard the International Space Station. Pretty uncomfortable, I think, wearing this harness, pulling her down onto a treadmill, but she ran 26.2 miles in weightlessness aboard the ISS a few years ago. But the kinds of things that we're looking to solve for long-duration space flyers, musculoskeletal deconditioning. We can't take a set of weights aboard the ISS or a deep space probe. It has to be low volume and low mass. Cardiovascular deconditioning is quite critical. There are neurovestibular adaptations because we don't have a gravity vector pulling down on our inner ear to tell us which way is up or down or left or right. We also are seeing in many of our long-duration astronauts changes in their vision as a result of increased intracranial pressure. So how do we mitigate that risk? We don't want to send people on a 2-year mission to Mars and have them come back functionally blind. So this is a really significant issue. There are changes in immune function as a result of unweighting in space, not having a gravity vector upon us. A lot of our bone density comes into the circulation, and we're at higher risk of kidney stones, calcium-based kidney stones. So obviously, that's a big problem here on Earth as well, as we age and with osteoporosis. There's also an issue with radiation beyond the Earth's magnetic fields, the Van Allen belts. How do we protect deep space explorers? How do we protect us all? Every time we get on a transatlantic airline, we're actually getting quite a bit of radiation. We don't talk about it very much, but the cumulative effects of that are not insignificant. So if we can solve the problem for astronauts, we can certainly benefit air travel here. And then, of course, just we need to improve our life support systems, making them more easy to repair and to sustain in a high dust environment like on the Moon and on Mars. Other things that you have to think about when you're sending a crew perhaps on a 2-year journey to Mars or maybe to the south pole of the Moon is the psychological factors of that crew. When you get well past Earth's orbit, you're on a 2-year voyage to Mars, for example, you can't just look out the window and have a connectedness to the planet. You can't pick up a phone and have a normal conversation. It could be a 21-minute one-way good morning. You could say good morning from the surface of Mars. It would be received in 21 minutes, and then to get a response, it would be 21 minutes later. That's a fairly stilted kind of conversation. So we have to figure out different ways to communicate, to be bonded with our families as we leave them behind on these types of journeys. There's a social monotony, of course, a lack of Earth connectedness that I mentioned. And then, there's a workload issue, especially on your way to Mars. How do we keep people engaged and so on? There are also issues with circadian triggers, and then interpersonal relationships, and there are language issues that we have to consider because it'll be a very international crew. I alluded to the fact that it's a very long way. Depending on where the Earth and Mars are in relation to one another, it could be a very short transit for communications, or it could be up to 21 minutes in some circumstances. So thinking about how we're going to deliver healthcare, for example, we can't use teleoperation because of the latency involved. So we have to think about consultancy and even just-in-time training. How do we mentor from afar and deal with these extraordinary distances? But NASA is investigating a number of these types of technologies. This is actually an experiment that was conducted in the Florida Keys at a facility called Aquarius. It's in about 55 feet of seawater off of Key Largo, and a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic operated a surgical robot. And this is astronaut Bob Thirsk of Canada monitoring that experiment. So these are things that obviously will help us in Earth orbit and perhaps even on the Moon, but think about even rural parts of this country. In Yahoo, North Dakota, if you don't have a neurosurgeon in an emergency, can you deliver teleoperated surgical capability? And I think the answer is yet, and it's incumbent upon us to deliver some of those technologies. There are other really exciting things that I think are happening in space transportation. I don't know if Franklin Chang Diaz came to Pumps and Pipes this year. I know he's been a part of the conference before, but there are plasma ion engines that could actually dramatically accelerate a spacecraft for these long distances, but it's still a long way, probably a 2 or 3 month journey to get to Mars. The other thing that we really need to think about is, how do we take all the things that we anticipate needing? Well, we're not smart enough to think about every single combination and permutation of medical supply and tools that might be required as things start to break and as we make new discoveries. So we need to figure out how to learn to live out off of the land. And of course, on the Moon and many places on Mars, there's actually frozen water ice that we could harvest. We could mine for water, believe it or not, and use that to break it apart, to generate oxygen to breathe, and to grow plants in hydroponic environments. We have to think about other challenges as well. Food, of course, is a key consideration. We can't plan for a 2-year mission to Mars and take every bit of food with us. We're going to have to generate some of that on the way and perhaps on the planet, because it's so massive, and it costs a lot of money to launch things off of the planet. We obviously need to manage the environment inside the oxygen and nitrogen and CO2 balance. We need to extract water, ideally from the environment. But for this group, I think what's quite exciting actually is how do we provision these faraway clinics with the medications that we need. Solid tablets actually do quite well over long periods of time. Their shelf life is quite good, but if you have something in solution, there's a concern that there's bacterial overgrowth. You can't keep things in the pharmacy for all that long. So as we have for 3D printing, do we have the ability to do just-in-time chemical fabrication, and can we make them of sufficient purity to do the job? And then, of course, the medications. Beyond that, we need propellants to get us back home. So the final thing that I'll leave you with is just who will these future explorers be? I think it's going to be a really extraordinary, epic expedition when we first send astronauts to Mars. They're going to be an international crew, of course, so they'll need to be broadly cross-trained in medicine and science, engineering, operations. They'll be multicultural in composition, so multiple languages most likely. And you can see some of the skills that I propose we would need in this extraordinary crew. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and give the baton over to my friend Paul, who hails from Brooklyn. So please welcome Paul. Something like that. There we go. Get you going here.
Hello everyone, good afternoon, and thank you, Scott, for a wonderful speech. It's a very hard man, as you can guess, to follow. I'm doing a talk with Scott, but I'll try my best. So my name is Paul Fotheringham. I'm the founder of an organisation called 3Lifeprints. My background is a computer scientist, and I spent most of my career working for the investment banking industry for my sins for the last sort of 25 years. I ended up moving to Kenya, of all places, to run a microfinance organisation. At that point, I saw an opportunity to start a social enterprise for making 3D printed prosthetics. The beginning started at a party full of architects for some reason. I'm not sure why it was all architects. In the corner, I saw this machine whirring away, making something. I thought, wow, what's that? I'd never heard of 3D printing. I'd never seen 3D printing. And all of a sudden, my brain started to think, what else could you make? In Kenya, unfortunately, there's a lot of amputees from snake bites, amputees from hippo bites, lions, industrial accidents. And then from really, I started to look at, can we 3D print hands? Can we 3D print arms that are customized for the body, hence the sort of personalization of health? I looked online and saw I wasn't the first person to have the idea, but I was the first person globally to be actually in a developing country with the same idea and the same technology. Some people would have thought they could take a printer to a village in Sudan. It lasted about a week before all the parts were harvested and stolen and so forth, or broke down. So supply chain logistics for 3D printing at the time, it was costing 150% in custom taxes, was very hard. So we went through a number of iterations, as you can see on the left-hand side there, from sort of bad to not bad on the right-hand side, really towards looking at Pantone skin colors and really how that can be customized towards a device that actually was fit for purpose for the amputee. It's not just to pick up a cup of tea, it's used to work the land, to drive a tractor, to do mainly manual labor. So really we wanted to find a way of making a product that fit the 4 A's, we called it: accessibility, awareness, acceptance, and accessibility, 3 of them. At Zuri, we found the biggest one was acceptance. They wanted it to look nice. They wanted it to look like the same skin color. They wanted it to look like a real hand. Unfortunately, they're ostracized in society as they are, so having this robotic hand didn't go down very well. So really that's how we sort of started, and on the right-hand side you can see our last product we call the Life Arm. It's been fitted in about 100 or 200 patients around the world, everywhere from Colombia through to Southeast Asia and Cambodia. The man in the middle unfortunately lost his arm in a fishing accident. The wire got wrapped around his arm, and so we provided him with a device that he can now go back in the boat and fund his lifestyle for his children and his family. Moving on. So the beginnings was a social enterprise, and then a strange segue happened. A friend of mine is a founder of a demining company in Zimbabwe, and he saw the opportunity to use 3D printing to make fake landmines, to make fake rockets, to make fake unexploded remnants of war. Because if not, the children see the device, they pick it up, boom, and unfortunately they die. So on the left-hand side, we somehow got in with the white helmets in Syria. Some of you may have heard of them. At the time, very, very big in terms of doing some amazing work in helping civilians with the war with Syria and with the Russians. So on the left-hand side, you can see some of the devices we made. These are 3D printed from exact copies. Our first beginnings, we were out in the field scanning these ourselves in places like South Sudan, Somalia, and we found it was too expensive and too time-consuming. So we moved on to a method of taking a 2D picture of the device and the schematics, and then could turn that into a 3D model, and then 3D print that in the exact same size and shape. So what they actually used for, they're used by the soldiers to train what not to touch, how to safely disarm them. They're used by the local community and the elders to show the community, this is a cluster bomb, don't touch this, it's very bad for you. And to make permanent mine gardens in the area. A lot of the men, they work the land, they're not able to see when the NGOs come to give them what they call mine risk education. So with that in mind, we have permanent mine gardens that sit within the communities, so they can always see what it looks like, the device that's half buried, that's been corroded for the last 50 years. There's 80 million landmines in the ground. There's no time soon they'll ever be removed, and the war in Ukraine is adding an awful lot. So it's a huge problem, and it's very expensive to deal with, and very expensive to train properly. So the next iteration from that, as you can see in the top right picture, I was out in Mali for 3 weeks at the UN base there with the Bangladeshi peacekeepers. The UN asked us, can we make devices that have the same ground-penetrating radar signature? And by that I mean the same density, the same trihedral angles buried in the ground. So we were tasked to make 150 Belgium PRBM mines. We then, using a variety of materials, has exactly the same makeup as the actual device itself, albeit inert. So I was sent to the desert, very hot desert, to bury these landmines in the Mali desert for them then, as you can see, for the trainers to then understand how can they detect these devices. So quite an interesting experience. Lots of incoming mortar attacks at the time from ISIS and from other of the rebel groups in the area. And this really then accumulated in a strange ask where I was talking in front of the UN General Assembly, as you can see in the bottom right, where they portrayed both our prosthetic products and our landmine products in front of 190 countries that were participating in the global mine action. So quite an interesting journey. I mean, we still today provide a lot of these devices for the Red Cross, other places in about 15 countries now. And unfortunately, it will always be there, the need to provide this, especially now with Ukraine. So my organisation is not about that really. That's my sort of humanitarian side. We're a UK-based organisation, sit in what we call point of care. So point of care within the UK, we sit in the hospitals itself, we put people and technology. And what we do as an organisation, we personalise health. Less than 1% of all surgeries globally, about 300 million in the developed world, actually have any shape of personalisation. For example, if you have a hole in the head and they want to do a cranial plate, they get a bit of metal, they bend it on your head in the actual surgery at the same time. So we can provide a number of products that are personalized using digital technologies, 3D printing and virtual technologies. And really the problem has been the lack of mainstream adoption because of lack of reimbursement and money available for that. So in the UK, we sit within the NHS. We sit in 6 major hospitals. We've got 17 biomedical engineers that sit within that facilities, and recently opened up within the Texas Medical Center in the innovation department. From there, we make a number of products. We do surgical planning, virtual, digital. We make PSI guides, so patient-specific instrumentation guides, which looks a bit like this, and I'll have a bit more explanation in a second. We make implants that go in the body temporarily, and implants that go in the body full-time For example, titanium cranial plates, titanium mandibular plates, or orbital plates. So really, you can see the power of 3D printing and the ability to make you a customized device that will fit your body with all the benefits that comes with that. We're ISO 13485 certified and FDA cleared, which has been a long journey for us because obviously what we're doing could have adverse effects on the patient's body. So as I said, some go in the body for the rest of your life, some are temporarily fixated within there. We're unique in terms of the AI and the data we use, the big data, to provide the intelligence to extrapolate the information and provide this as a platform as a service, so a cloud-based platform where surgeons across the globe can use as a one-stop shop for ordering devices, reviewing devices, and so forth. But I'll come to that in a second. So, sorry for the gory picture here. I made it black and white to make it a bit less impactful. But you can see here is these things called surgical guides that I'm holding in my hand. And this is a craniomaxillofacial operation called a fibula-free flap reconstruction. If you have problems with your jaw because of cancer or radiotherapy that may disintegrate your jaw, they often cut your fibula out and then use that to reconstruct your jaw. In the past, they would open you up, get a blue pen, and then draw X marks a spot. But with these surgical guides, we're able to plan that exactly. So how does it work from the start? We take MRI and CT scans. We use software to extrapolate the information or the area of interest that we require. We then use that to create a 3D model. We then use that to create a 3D virtual plan off from there. And that all accumulates in these devices that are biocompatible for all bad things in the body. So very safe for use in the body, very cleared. And this can be used in a number of places. So for this example, this would fit on your cheek. So they cut your fibula out. They cut out the bad bits of bone and mandible. The exact shape and size has been pre-planned before the actual event. So all the benefits that come with pre-planning, I'll talk to you in a second. That was it, I think. So what problems are we solving? I often get asked this by the community and by my investors. Less time in theatre. So what does that actually mean? If you have less time in theatre, let's say the operation takes, 28 minutes less than it should have, that doesn't actually equate to anything in real life in terms of financial savings, but what you can do is couple that up for the following year. So if I know I've saved in total 13,000 minutes over the year by using the technology to pre-plan for doing faster cuts in the operating theatre, I can then plan more operations in that day and in that year. And obviously for the financial controls within the hospitals, more operations is good in terms of throughput, turnover, and financially. Highly accurate resection margins. So if you have cancer in your pelvis, for example, it's very important for the surgeon to be able to cut out that tumour without touching it, but minimising the damage around the rest of the area as well within the pelvis. So with the surgical guides, you can cut the exact shape within there, and all of that comes down to nice things like less blood loss. So blood loss is a big thing. It's expensive to provide blood in an operating theatre, and the more you can have faster time getting that patient out of the theatre, less blood loss, less time under anaesthesia, which allows for benefits both from the patient outcome and financially. Lower complication rates in terms of infection, because the devices are personalised. Infections and litigation is a huge thing both in the UK and the US in terms of making sure that the patient doesn't need to go back in for surgery and lowering, as I said, lowering the infection rates that may happen due to a purely placed implant. As I mentioned there, faster rehabilitation times and better patient outcomes. The last one is around the nature of what we do, having at the point of care with clean rooms. So we can manufacture in the hospital itself. So I can be told on a Friday evening, I need one of these for a Monday morning. We can then have that through the workflow by the Monday morning, ready for sterilisation and in the theatre. And that can only happen by being at the point of care. A quick example here called a hemiopelviectomy. Very complex case. I'll let you read the quote from a senior surgeon in the UK. Unfortunately, with this procedure, they cut half your body off due to cancer in your pelvis, but really it's a great example to show complex operations and how these surgical guides are so important towards giving the surgeons the best tool possible for them to be able to minimise the risks and have a successful surgery. So last slide, and then we can move on to some QA. We have another aspect we do as well for surgical simulation. Over the years, we make very highly realistic tissue-mimicking models of organs, kidneys, hearts, livers, etc. On the left is a beating heart. This has been made in conjunction with the David Knott Foundation, an amazing NGO in the UK, excuse me, that provides war surgeons and training in places like Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. So we were tasked with making a heart that can be cut, can be flagellated, sutured, while beating. In a war zone, they don't have the ability to stop your heart as they're trying to, do the emergency operations on you from gunshot, from blast wounds, and so that heart can be cut and sutured as it beats. So we're very proud of the work we're doing with Ukraine now. It's about 150 of these in Ukraine across the country, helping the war surgeons learn how to do it, because obviously in the past they had no experience with dealing with major issues of gunshot in a war scenario. On the right, you can see it's a kidney. This thing here, again, this has all the internal details. It can be used to simulate gunshot wounds, blast wounds, can be cut, etc. This particular one here has a tumour on it and allows the surgeon to be able to train to cut the tumour out, again, while minimising tissue loss in the area. Well, I think that's all my slides, so I'll hand it over to Scott, and so have some Q&A if you want. Hello. Hi, so any questions for Scott or myself?
We have a mic here that we can give in the audience. Here we go.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Kevin, and my brother and I we both were just talking about how it's fascinating that you have been to space and Everest, and with both experiences, how do you compare those and the challenges intellectually, physically, mentally? Just wanted to hear some thoughts about that.
Sure, thank you, Kevin. No, they're actually similar in many ways, and obviously very different in others. But I use the same kind of mental framework and preparation for Mount Everest that I applied to going into space. So to be successful on a big mountain like that, you really need to not only be physically and technically capable, but you need to understand the pitfalls, the risks that are out there, and try and mitigate all of them that you possibly can. So when you go out on a spacewalk, there are things that you can train for and mitigate risks, and there are others that you can't anticipate. On Mount Everest, you can't anticipate avalanches, for example. You can minimize your exposure by getting up very early in the morning and starting your climb before the sun hits and snow starts to loosen up, and exposing you to more risks. So the same sort of framework that I use for my space travels, I apply to Everest. But they're both extraordinary environments. I wouldn't trade either one. I remember my summit morning on Mount Everest thinking, as I crawled out of the vestibule of my tent, this is just like floating outside of the airlock hatch going out on a spacewalk. I had a big mask on, a big down suit, big mitts, big boots, and I was hooking into fixed lines. As we do for spacewalks, we're always connected to our spacecraft, and I really thought that I was stepping out into the void on summit morning, much as you feel on a spacewalk. The wonderful thing about being in space, though, is that it's just so liberating. You're floating everywhere you go. You push off with your fingertips and you fly like Buzz Lightyear, and you have this grace of an Olympic gymnast or diver. But when you're on a big mountain like Everest, you're weighted down with lots of gear, and you're working at red line. You're breathing really fast, and there's a sense of exhaustion that you just don't have, obviously, in space. But thank you very much for the question.
I think there's a question at the back there.
Hi. I mentor and consult with the healthcare technology and clean tech startups. And I know that Hexoscan was able to have their best go up into the ISS and an astronaut wearing it. Other than looking at Trish announcements or NASA proposals, is there like a vehicle to refer startups that have Earth-dwelling technology that could be used in space other than like the vacuum of space?
Yeah, great question. And I know there are other people in the room from Trish who could probably answer that question better than I, but there is a group that evaluates all the health risks for human spaceflight, and they write reports, and it's, I believe, through the National Academy of Science, National Academy of Medicine. They've cataloged all of the threats to human health and performance. And so the needs of the space program are documented, and I'm sure someone here in this audience can probably get that information to you, or you could Google it, but it's managed out of the Johnson Space Center, and it's the Human Health Risks database. Anyone here in the room know the answer to that? And blurt it out if you know the name of the organization. But well, you should be able to find it pretty easily through the Johnson Space Center. Yeah. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. The last talk in the program will be addressing this. Perfect. Thank you so much.
How long have you had 6 people in a box together? Have you gone 2 years with them? You know, I can stand about 3 days with somebody, and that's about it. And to me, you're either going to have to do a frontal lobotomy or drugs, or otherwise.
That's a pretty honest assessment, and it's an important one. So, you know, on a space shuttle flight, as I flew 5 times on the shuttle, you can get along with anybody for a couple of weeks, a little bit longer than 3 days, I think, especially if you're doing something really exciting and meaningful. But it's a much more significant thing if you're up there for 6, 12, 24 months at a time. And so crew selection has a lot to has a lot of value. And so there are psychiatrists and psychologists that spend a lot of time in the crew and look for crew compatibility. There's a lot of emphasis and training in terms of cross-cultural understanding. We learn each other's languages as well. It's not a perfect solution. There have been some notable crew dissent or discord in the past. I think during the Soviet era aboard the Russian space station Mir, a couple of crew members didn't talk to each other for 5 months. So that would be a terrible thing if you've got 6 people on their way to Mars. So as much emphasis as can be placed on crew selection and then also crew training. We use a program called National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS, and we send astronaut crews out into the wilderness to somewhat uncomfortable environments, and each day there's a different leader, and there's navigation involved, and typically climbing a mountain or some other objective. But in that kind of environment, you really get to understand the strengths and weaknesses of a person's leadership style and their followership style, and just different ways to work with one another. And that's been really successful aboard the International Space Station. We've had a number of crew members now who've spent a year or more in space. You may have heard about Scott Kelly, one of my colleagues, recently spent a full year. We've got another crew completing their year-long journey right now. Anyone else?
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what the challenges are, the practical challenges to 3D printing on the station as compared to the challenges of the kind of 3D printing that you were talking about medically.
Good question. It's all about microgravity. So there's currently 3 printers on the space station and now 1 bioprinter. The first one made in space was about 5 or 6 years ago now, I think. And so the problems is the normal way for 3D printing is a fused deposition method. So you've got a material, you melt it up to a certain temperature, and then it squirts out, and then you have the layers built up of that. Obviously in microgravity and no gravity environments, that's very difficult to do. I don't know, Scott, have you any comments about printing on the space station? Have you any knowledge?
It wasn't available.
Yeah. So I'm afraid I don't know much about how you print in microgravity, but I do know it's been a challenge. Okay, great. If there's no more questions, then thank you very much.